Today, when it would seem that almost all science is looking into the future, archaeologists are still finding ancient artifacts that can change our understanding of the planet's past. In this video, you will see the finds that most influenced the world history of discoveries. Hi friend, you are on the KirTop channel. Mound Hisarlyk, 1800s. An archaeological team led by Professor Rostam Aslan during excavations in the ancient city of Troy in northwestern Turkey discovered a cultural layer that pushes back the estimated date of the founding of this city by about 600 years. Archaeological excavations in the ancient city of Troy, located on the territory of the modern Turkish province of Çanakkale, have been ongoing for about a century and a half. Scientists scrupulously opened the settler layer by layer. In total, 9 of them have been found over the past years. This proves that during its existence, Troy was destroyed more than once by wars, fires, and earthquakes, but its inhabitants always restored it. Rostam Aslan's team from Çanakkale University found traces of a previously unknown 10th settlement layer. This is an earlier period than what scientists call Troy 1. The new layer was named Troy 0. It proves that the history of the city is much richer than it was thought. So far, the oldest layer found in Troy dates back to around 2920 BC. According to Aslan, the discovered layer turned out to be about 600 years older. In other words, Troy was found around 3500 BC. Megalosaurus, 1824. Megalosaurus was the first dinosaur to be explored. Of course, fossil skeletons of dinosaurs were found before, but then science could not explain what kind of creatures they were. Some believed that it was the study of Megalosaurus that was the beginning of many science fiction stories about dragons. However, not only this was the result of such a find. There was a whole boom in the popularity of archaeology and humanity's passion for dinosaurs. Everyone wanted to find their remains. The found skeletons began to be classified and exhibited in museums for public viewing. Megalosaurus holds a special place in the history of paleontology, being the first dinosaur known to humans. But it is still not entirely clear what he still looked like. At the beginning, when the lizard had just been found, and there was no one to compare it with, the first paleontologists reconstructed the Megalosaurus as an animal that looked like a dragon with a large head and walked on 4 legs. And so they thought until decades later, in North America, the remains of theropods similar to it began to be found, and it became clear that it was a bipedal animal. The head of Megalosaurus was large and arched with sharp predatory teeth, and its neck was very flexible. The body was in balance even when the lizard stood on 2 legs thanks to its long tail. Massive legs held a lot of weight. On the paws there were apparently 3 supporting fingers and another one sticking out back. The front paws were smaller than the hind ones. They had either 3 or 4 fingers. Treasures of Sutton Hoo, 1939. Sutton Hoo is a burial necropolis in the English county of Suffolk, which was discovered in the late 1930s and where the most significant archaeological finds in the history of Great Britain were made. Among these finds was a burial ship dating from the turn of the 6th and the 7th centuries. It is believed that this tomb of the East Anglian king Redwold and the antiquities that archaeologists have found are amazing. Redwold died in 624 and was buried in a burial boat 27 meters long. It was in the necropolis of Sutton Hoo that the earliest burial grounds of the 6th-7th centuries were discovered, and it turned out quite funny. Excavations in 1939 were initiated by a certain lover of mysticism, Edith Mary Pretty, who had heard enough stories from local old-timers about gold hidden in mounds and who dreamed of mysterious figures on the hills. This place itself has an interesting history. Initially, people of the Neolithic period lived in this area about 3,000 years ago. Then people of the Bronze Age settled here. These were prosperous communities that pioneered metalworking, but it was the Anglo-Saxons who brought the greatest changes to Sutton Hoo. The tragic history of Baghdad. Baghdad is a large and beautiful city of the Middle Ages. Science and art flourished here. The city conducted extensive trade and was economically successful. How did it happen that in the late Middle Ages, Baghdad abruptly went to the margins of history? See the inner circle in the city center? There was a mosque and a caliph's place. Also in this circle were the palaces of other members of the royal family, barracks for horse guards, royal kitchens, and houses for officials and servants of the caliph. In the 8th century AD, Caliph of the Abbasids, Al-Mansur, sailed along the Tigris River several times in search of a suitable place for the capital. As a result, he decided to build a city on the Tigris, but in the immediate vicinity of the Euphrates, to actively trade using the advantages of both rivers at once. In the 9th century, Baghdad becomes the leader of the Arab world. Crafts and trade flourish here. Baghdad traded with Europe, India, and Arabia, but merchants from very distant countries also came here. It is known that the Ras also traded in Baghdad. Traders came from the shores of the distant Lake Ladoga. In the 13th century, it was plundered by the Mongols. It took them only 12 days of siege to take Baghdad. The Mongols had the best Chinese siege engineers at their disposal, who them captured during the conquest of China. Baghdad had about 1 million inhabitants, but the Mongols did not spare anyone. This was their principle. If the city did not surrender, then they sought to completely destroy the population in order to keep everyone else at bay. Usually only artisans and blacksmiths were left alive. The Mongols took them and used them inside their country because they themselves were not engaged in crafts. The Mongols destroyed and burned down the Baghdad House of Wisdom. Scientific works from all over the world were kept here. Here was the largest library of the Middle Ages. For centuries, people have been recording and accumulating knowledge, and the Mongols burned it all down overnight. The Mongols captured the Caliph and he died of hunger in prison. His family managed to escape to Cairo and rule the country from there. However, Baghdad has since begun to fade. And again, it was never able to come close to the glory that surrounded the city for 500 years before the invasion of the Mongol horde. Dmanisi 2005. A long-term biomolecular study by Georgian scientists and their foreign colleagues confirmed that the world's oldest DNA, extracted from the remains of an animal, was found in the southeast of Georgia, in the ancient settlement of Dmanisi, located 90 kilometers from Tbilisi in the Kvimo-Kartli region. From the toothed animal of a rhinoceros found in Dmanisi, scientists were able to extract important genetic information, which is about 1.77 million years old. This is the oldest DNA recovered from the remains of an animal, which is 1 million years older than information previously known about DNA taken 700,000 years ago from a horse on Yukon Island in northwestern Canada. Ancient men and the creatures that evolved into modern Homo sapiens have been studied for many years. It would seem that today there are no white spots left in the history of our evolution, but an almost 2-million-year-old skull found in the Georgian city of Dmanisi made archaeologists and historians think. It represents the remains of the Homo erectus species, which migrated from Africa, and confirms the hypothesis that these species stand separately in the evolutionary chain. Jamestown 2013. The site of what once was Jamestown, the first permanent British settlement in North America, has recently unearthed the remains of Gabriel Archer, one of the leaders of the colony. This discovery in itself is an important event for American historical science. However, in Archer's grave, among other things, they also found a silver box of unknown purpose. Archaeologists suggest that the box was used as a repository for relics and could be a relic for Catholics. Considering that Jamestown was found by the Protestant English and was conceived as a stronghold of the British Empire in the fight against the expansion of the Catholic Spaniards, the Catholic relic in the grave of one of the founders of the city looks at least strange and suggests that an underground Catholic church existed in the settlement circle. Scientists have always talked about cannibalism in the ancient settlements of Jamestown, but neither historians nor archaeologists have ever had direct evidence of this. Of course, history tells us that in ancient times, people in search of the new world and riches often found a terrible and cruel end, especially in the cold winter. Last year, William Kelso and his team discovered the punctured skull of a 14-year-old girl in a pit filled with the remains of horses and other animals that the settlers ate during the famine. Kelso is convinced that the girl was killed to satisfy hunger, and the skull was pierced to get to the soft tissues and brain. Headless Vikings of Dorset, 2009. On the south coast of England, near the city of Weymouth, Dorset, archaeologists from Oxford Archaeology have discovered a mass grave of decapitated men, presumably Vikings. Radiocarbon analysis dated the find to 830–1034 AD. That is, just the era when the Anglo-Saxons fought fiercely with warlike newcomers from Scandinavia. The mass grave contained the remains of 51 people. They were all young, healthy, strong-built. Their skulls were buried in the same pit, but in a separate pile. Most of the remains show traces of sword or axe blows that fell on the necks, heads, and jaws. One of the men apparently raised his hand in defense, and his fingers were cut off. It is noteworthy that all the victims were stripped before dumping their bodies into the pit. Although detailed anthropological studies of the found skeletons have not yet been carried out, archaeologists have reason to believe that they found the Vikings and not the Anglo-Saxons. In particular, the dead were buried on top of a hill, which is natural for the local population and not for newcomers. The Vikings would have left their victims at the site of the battle or murder in the London area on the seashore or in the attacked villages or towns. Scientists have to conduct two studies of the remains from the mass grave. First, they will find out the chemical composition of the teeth of those killed. As a rule, it can be used to determine quite accurately where a person came from. Secondly, an anthropometric study of the skeletons will indicate the type of activity of the murdered men. If they were Vikings, then most of them were rowers, which means that they can observe the specific development of the shoulder girdle, back, and arms. Göbekli Tepe, 2008. The oldest temple complex in the world, Göbekli Tepe, built about 12,000 years ago and located in the province of Şanlıurfa in southeastern Turkey, is now experiencing a rebirth. The Turkish authorities intend to turn it into a world-class archaeological center, and 2019 has been declared the year of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. The complex was discovered relatively recently, in 1963, and before that, local peasants complained with irritation about incomprehensible stone slabs that prevented them from farming. Initially, scientists assumed that these slabs were the remains of a cemetery from the Byzantine era, but in the 90s, the German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt arrived here, who attributed the finds to the Neolithic period, the last period of the Stone Age. He called their discovery a supernova and devoted the rest of his life to studying them. Geomagnetic studies carried out later confirmed Schmidt's guess. The structures on Pot-Bellied Hill were built about 12,000 years ago. For a long time, Stonehenge was considered the oldest religious building in the world. In the 60s of the 20th century, this hill in southeastern Turkey was potentially older than Stonehenge, but very soon it was recognized as a medieval cemetery. However, in 2008, Klaus Schmidt discovered 11,000-year-old stones there, which were clearly processed by a prehistoric man who did not yet have either clay or metal tools for this. Share this video with your friends and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your views. Bye everyone!